This gives me a very good opportunity to introduce the Minister, Bruno Le Maire, is the Minister of Finance and Economy of France, and we are very happy to have you with us today, Minister, because of course France, the Paris Agreement, of course, and many of the things that France is, and you were quoted, France was quoted earlier by my colleague, Minister from Mexico. He was saying that why is France having mobilizations and protests if you are not so unequal? So that's a question for you. And so, Minister, the floor is yours. And thank you for coming.
Thank you. Your Excellency, dear ministers and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hosting this very timely meeting. If you allow me, I just wanted to broaden a little bit the issue and talk about the question of capitalism and the necessity of fostering a new capitalism. Capitalism now is a living paradox. Capitalism has won, but it has also lost. It has won because capitalism is the leading economic model across the planet. It has brought prosperity everywhere in the world, and it has lifted millions of people out of poverty. Capitalism has won the ideological battle of the 20th century. There was an alternative model, and just one, communism, and communism has disappeared. But capitalism could also lose, because capitalism now fails to remove imbalances that are more and more a matter of concern and a matter of anger in many countries. Social imbalances with the rise of inequalities among nations and inside our own nations are something people cannot bear any longer. Environmental imbalances are something people do no longer accept, especially the youngest generation. Our planet is paying the high price for the success of capitalism, but people do not want to pay that price anymore. And what is worse, capitalism no longer stands for hope. It does not mean progress for the man on the street, for his kids, for his future. Such a capitalism as it stands, with so many imbalances, with the risk on our environment, with the climate change, has no future. That's my deep conviction. That's why capitalism needs a revolution, and as soon as possible. And we have three options, I would say, three kinds of revolutions. And you know that in France we are keen on revolutions since 1789. The first option for this new capitalism would be a fake revolution, pretending that we are changing capitalism, but letting it remain the same as before. This is a dead end. It would be violently rejected by a growing number of citizens. The second option would be a political revolution, seeing another economic model overthrow capitalism, like, for instance, a new kind of communism. This is probably what populist parties hope for, but it would end up in violence, in poverty, and in chaos. Our common responsibility here, and this is especially a responsibility for the finance ministers, is to avoid this. And we should be aware that everywhere in Europe, we have to face now the most rapid rise of populist parties since World War II. The third option, which is to me the good option and the option that is currently defended by President Macron, is a kind of Copernican revolution. We have to understand the flaws of capitalism and to adapt it to the 21st century world. A Copernican revolution in the capitalism could be based on three pillars. The first one, which is a key one, and especially here in the Vatican State, is reducing inequalities. As it is today, capitalism fails to stop inequalities from growing. This is an economic aberration, as Joseph Stiglitz said, and a political danger. I see two types of inequalities we have to address first, and as soon as possible. The first one is to fight excessive wage inequalities. Wage differences between employees and managers are normal, but we can no longer accept that the heads of the largest companies earn 300 to 400 times more than the average salary of their employees. This is outrageous. This is not decent. This is also detrimental to our society as a whole and to the values on which our societies are based, because it negates the very value of work and it feeds social division everywhere in our developed nations. Governments should take the right measures to ensure that people can live decently from their work. And companies also have to play their part by better sharing the value they create and helping their employees to progress in their professional life. That's exactly what we are trying to do now in France. We must also fight gender inequalities, because these inequalities should have disappeared long ago. How can we say that we are developed countries with so much inequalities between women and men when you are looking at the economic situation? Why are women in France and in almost all developed countries still paid 19% less on average than men with similar diploma and equal qualifications? We have to change this, and to change it right now. The second pillar of this Copernican revolution would be to protect our planet, as Nadia just explained. The time when countries could all be running a global race for growth without taking into account the impact of growth on our planet is over. That is precisely what Pope Francis has denounced in the Laudato Si encyclical, and we fully share that point of view. Citizens want to keep their common homes safe for the generations to come. They expect technology to provide solutions to fight against global warming. They want us to take decisions right now, and dramatic decisions, not limited ones. The key question is the kind of solutions we are ready to put on the table to combine the necessity of improving economic productivity, as explained by many in these rooms, and the fight against climate change. And there are solutions. I just want to quote three of them. The first one is, of course, finance. Finance is a key part. We need green finance. We need massive investments to help people change their habits and to invest in green technologies such as energy storage or hydrogen energy. We can rely on the support of this new taxonomy. We can rely on the support of the European Bank for Climate. We can rely on the private banks and the public funding. But we have now, once again, to act as quickly as possible to deliver the necessary funding for the fight against climate change. The second tool is innovation, research, because that's the only way of combining productivity and the fight against climate change. And the third response, of course, is the development of new skills and vocational training, because we need to help people to have access to the new jobs created by the fight against climate change. The third pillar of this Copernican revolution is to restore what capitalism means. We have to address this very difficult issue of the values of capitalism. Profit cannot be the single value on which our economic model is based. That's not enough, and that's not fair. My last remarks would be about the best way of making this Copernican revolution on capitalism happen. I think that one of the key is to clearly redefine the role of states and the role of private companies in the 21st century. And I want to be very clear, for the French government, for the French president, and I think that for many European states, states have a key role to play in this Copernican revolution, because they are based on general interest. They are based on common values, and not only on private interest. States must protect. States must protect the weakest people in the society. States must protect by taking the right measures to fight against climate change. States must protect to avoid having digital giants, having the same power as states that are elected by a majority of people. We do not want the internet giants to take the place of sovereign states everywhere around the world. And we want to address that key question for the 21st century. And that's one of the battles that with President Macron, we are fully determined to win for the sake of preserving the sovereignty of nations and states. We have many possibilities of addressing that question. The first one is to introduce a fair taxation of digital giants. How can you explain to the people that the most important private companies around the world will pay less taxes than the smallest SMEs in your nations? How can you explain the difference of taxation of 14 points between Google and the smallest bakery in your street? That's something that the people can no longer accept. The second way of addressing that key issue of digital giants is to introduce stronger competition rules to avoid having those huge giants having all the rights and no duties. The third way of addressing this question is, of course, to have also the possibility of fighting against some initiatives like Libra, the private currency proposed by Facebook. If we accept to have one private company with the size of Facebook, with more than 2.7 billion consumers having its own private currency, this is the end of the public sovereign currencies, and this is the end of the sovereignty of the states. So states must regulate, and the very last mission of the states would be, of course, to prepare for the future by funding innovation and creativeness. I also think that private companies have a critical role to play. Global awareness is rising across the planet. Global awareness about the necessity of having private companies playing their role and playing their duties to face some of the key challenges of the 21st century. France introduced last year the notion of a sense of purpose that companies should follow. I think that's critical to change the role of the private companies in the society and to help them playing a public role, even if they are private societies. So these would be my general remarks about this necessity of funding a new capitalism. Just a very last word. We have to act deeper and quicker if we want to be successful. We are in a race, a political one, in Europe, between populism and decisions from our nations. Either we are able to act deeper and quicker so that people can see a concrete change in their daily life, so that we can restore hope in our democracies, or our democracies will fail and will be replaced by strong regimes, illiberal regimes everywhere in Europe. That's exactly what is at stake for the 21st century, especially within the EU. Never forget that economic questions are always political questions. The response to that key challenge for the 21st century depends on all of us. Thank you.
Wow, excellent, Minister. Thank you so much. Your message actually is restoring the balance. And that's something that Joe Stiglitz said this morning, restoring the balance between the market, the governments, and society, actually, because society feels that they are not part of this, and they have to be part of this renewed capitalism you were talking about. Minister, thank you so much. I think it was worth you coming, worth us listening, so thank you so much for the effort.